Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. My name is Olivia Allen, and I am the facilitator of the water adaptation community at the Global Center on Adaptation. I'd like to introduce you to the chair of this webinar, Mr. Nishal Sarju. He's a young water professional and urban water resilience advisor at deltaic, based in Jakarta. Holding an MSc in Systems Engineering and Policy Analysis from TU Delft, Nishal has dedicated the last years to addressing complex urban water management challenges, focusing on bolstering resilience against floods, droughts, climate change, and other natural hazards, while working for governments and international financing institutions such as the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank. With experience in multiple Delta countries across Southeast Asia and South America, Nishal works at the interface of technology, institutions, and policy, putting particular emphasis on the role of people and human interaction in water management. Over to you, Nishal. Thank you again.
Thank you, Olivia. Welcome, everybody. It's really nice to be here from a very warm Netherlands, based in Jakarta, but currently in the Netherlands. It's with pleasure that I welcome you also to this webinar on adaptation analysis, planning and implementation for resilient Delta cities. As you may know, this is the second webinar in a 4-part series on future-proofing climate adaptation of deltas, coast and small islands through action, political will and financing. I would particularly like to thank the organizers, the speakers and the participants for joining. We anticipate that the webinar will last around 1 hour and 40 minutes, a bit longer than originally planned. A little bit on the background of the webinar, with a little bit on technical background. We all know that there are several external pressures such as climate change, sea level rise, urbanization, and the high level of uncertainties that they bring along. It becomes even more important to adopt an adaptive approach towards planning in and around the water sector, particularly for governments. But there is also a role for us as citizens of countries. For example, analyzing the risks and vulnerabilities, decision makers can develop a comprehensive understanding of the challenges and prioritize appropriate adaptation measures. When making the step toward implementation, because that's also one of the keywords of the webinar today, we also know that by investigating and adaptation measures can yield economic benefits for cities. By reducing the damage caused by water-related hazards, cities can save costs associated with infrastructure repair, emergency response, and recovery efforts. Additionally, adaptation measures can create, for example, new economic opportunities such as job creation in water management and resilience-related industry. In summary, adaptation analysis, planning, and implementation are essential for making cities resilient to water-related hazards. By understanding these vulnerabilities, conducting risk-based assessments for multi-hazards, enhancing resilience, and ensuring long-term sustainability, cities can effectively manage water-related risks and create safer, more sustainable environments for their inhabitants. I'm sure that we'll hear a lot more from our speakers today, and I don't need to jump a lot more into the content. A little bit on the core objectives of today. What we aim to do is co-create knowledge of strong water climate adaptation strategies and practices in delta cities. We will engage with experts in the field of urban delta resilience to learn about their latest thinking on urban resilience. We also aim to empower other deltaic and coastal cities to be ambitious and strategic when it comes to climate adaptation. What do we have on the agenda today? A short introduction on the International Panel on Deltas and Coastal Areas. We have opening remarks from Rebuild by Design, and then we have 4 presentations, followed by a Q&A panel discussion with the presenters. Participants can ask questions along the way in the Q&A box. We will close some updates with some updates and opportunities from GCA's Water Adaptation Community. Very short remark on IPDC. These webinars are presented by the International Panel on Deltas and Coastal Cities, IPDC, which is an initiative of the Dutch Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management, deltaic, the Delta Alliance, and the Global Center of Adaptation. To start, I'd like to welcome Adam Baji of GCA, Program Officer, International Panel on Deltas and Coastal Areas. to give us a brief overview of the IPDC.
Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. It is with great pleasure that I stand before you today on behalf of IPDC. This groundbreaking initiative, which was just mentioned, is supported by the Dutch Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management, deltaic, and the Global Center on Adaptation. And IPDC is dedicated to unlocking 5 billion worth of adaptation projects in 30 countries by 2030, ultimately benefiting the lives of 100 million people and their livelihoods. Facilitate IPDC as an international hub where countries are taking the lead in seeking and offering a wide range of recommendations and solutions, including delta management, coastal protection, island management, technical and governance solutions, and access to finance. It fosters effective collaboration and interconnectivity between project initiatives and available financial assets. At IPDC, we embrace a multi-layered approach that encompasses political, scientific, and implementation levels. Through this approach, champion countries have the unique opportunity to mobilize both political will and financial resources, thereby ensuring that the voices of the water sector are heard loud and clear. I am delighted to share that our esteemed members include Argentina, Colombia, Vietnam, Singapore, South Africa, Bangladesh, Egypt, Aruba, Curaçao, Sint Maarten, Bonaire, Sint Eustatius, and Sabah, and the Asian Development Bank and the Green Climate Fund. As we embark on this webinar today, I am filled with optimism about the invaluable insights and discussions that await us. Each speaker's promises to be engaging, enlightening, and transformative. I extend my heartfelt gratitude to all of you for being part of this event. Together, let us pave the way for a resilient future. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. We've been hearing a lot about IPDC, and we are looking forward to hearing more on the progress in the coming years. Thank you again. To open the webinar, I would like to welcome Ms. Amy Chester, the Managing Director of Rebuild by Design. Ms. Chester has spent more than 25 years in municipal policy, community engagement, real estate development, and communications, advocating for the built environment. As the Managing Director of Rebuild by Design, Amy's first task was to lead an international design-driven competition that utilized a truly inclusive and collaborative process to create implementable large-scale infrastructure projects to address the physical and social vulnerabilities exposed by Hurricane Sandy in the Northeast United States. Previously, Amy worked for New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg as Chief of Staff to the Deputy Mayor for Legislative Affairs and as a Senior Policy Advisor. In these roles, she was responsible for the public engagement strategy of PLA New York City, which included initiatives such as the Million Trees campaign, congestion pricing, and the Greener, Greater Buildings Plan. Amy's other experience in New York City government have included positions at the New York City Council and the New York City Housing Authority. Thank you, Amy, for being here, and we look forward to your remarks.
Thank you so much. And excuse me, first time I'm talking this morning. Good morning to everyone who might be in the US. Good afternoon to everyone else. Good evening to those in Asia. Thank you so much for having me here today. So I work for an organization called Rebuild by Design. We're about 10 years old, and I'm going to give you our origin story and talk to you about some of the projects that are being implemented right now. Rebuild by Design is an organization that's based in New York City, and we connect global expertise with local communities and local governments to develop innovative research, collaboration, and design processes to catalyze equitable climate adaptation. And we do that in 3 ways. The first is the one that we're most known for, and I'm going to talk to you about that today, and that's our large-scale regional design competitions. We've done that both in New York City, kind of Sandy region, so New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, and also the San Francisco Bay Area. The second is through innovative processes around the world where a government or a local community comes to us with some type of problem, and we help them figure out who are the partners in that, who the stakeholders are, and how to solve that problem collaboratively. And the last is through research and policy. Our origin story is through Hurricane Sandy, and this is what Hurricane Sandy looked like when it was hitting the Northeast United States, but obviously it looks just like many other storms around the world. And this is how it left our region. We had 650,000 homes damaged or destroyed, hitting 13 states, New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, definitely the worst. We had over 8 million people without power. And what that showed to us is the real connection between social resilience and physical resilience, that you really can't have one without the other. And social resilience is this really interesting and necessary idea that when people know each other, they fare much better during these massive vulnerable moments in life. And it started out with Eric Kleinenberg, who actually runs the institute that we are a part of in NYU, and his work looking at the 1995 Chicago heat wave. Chicago had a heat wave that killed 700 people in 1 week. And there are a lot of people talking about why and how that could possibly be in a place like Chicago in the United States, just in the 90s. And what his research showed is that the communities who were closer together, who physically lived closer together, who knew each other, who could check on each other, who knew when someone who they saw every day wasn't walking by, those communities were able to fare much, much better than the communities where there had a lot of vacancies and a lot of people didn't know each other. And when he looked at two communities that were really looked very similar on paper, one community had 100 less deaths than the other community. So he's taken this idea of social resilience and has, it's been transformed by many researchers through the years. And he recently put out this book, Palaces for the People, which talks about how institutions such as libraries, community centers, and parks are really become those life and death moments for people when they have these climate vulnerabilities. And we had to figure out what to do after Hurricane Sandy. This was something very, very new for our community. And we knew that a typical design process wouldn't work, because a typical design process means that you know what you want to build, and then you back your way into it. If you have a school, if you have a hospital, you know how many beds you have to fit, you know what your budget is, and you try and figure out, okay, what do we need to do? But after Hurricane Sandy, we had no idea. So we launched a very different type of process. It was called the Hurricane Sandy Design Competition, spearheaded by our federal government. And it called for interdisciplinary teams from the Northeast United States to use federal dollars to think of our infrastructure differently. And it had two parts of it. It was collaborative research and collaborative design over this 9-month period. Collaborative research was when we had all of the teams come to New York City and spend 3 months walking and exploring the Hurricane Sandy region, talking to communities on the ground, working with local governments and understanding all the existing vulnerabilities, and then those that were exposed during the storm. Then we moved to a collaborative design stage where we were out in communities, literally designing with communities, understanding stakeholders, meeting with existing coalitions, forming new coalitions, and trying to create something that would address multiple vulnerabilities, not just what was exposed by the storm. We helped each of the design teams create and understand who is in their community, what types of government, community, and business stakeholders are present, and how they can reach each of them and design something that could be championed by all different types of people. And then we also layered on some really interesting events. And I think this is key to our work, is that we're always looking at different ways for communities to come out and celebrate together while we learn together. In the end, we started with 5 philanthropic funders and 4 partner NGOs, and we worked with over 140 neighborhoods, really 25 universities in the end of the implementation, over 500 community stakeholders, and 181 government agencies. This is a massive effort. And what's really important to know, and the kind of the reason why we do this is because we want that deep support. We want to make sure that communities are advocating for these programs, that they understand that these programs are going to take a long time for implementation. And when mayors change and presidents change and funding cycles change, you have created this base of support that can continue to be a partner with government agencies. In the end, each team created a very large project. There were 10 in all. The government awarded $930 million to these projects, and they started implementation. Implementation has taken an extremely long time because these are really big projects. They started right around 2016, and they're going on right now. About half of the projects have broken ground. All of them have stayed in one form or another. Many of them have changed. But what's really interesting is that our $930 million became $4.3 billion in the United States. And that is a really important point that I want to make, because good ideas are magnets for investment. If you create something that the community wants, local governments want, and you have a bit of money and you have a bit of idea and you show that you can implement it, then it attracts more money. And that's key to some of these projects, just getting them off the ground. So Rebuild by Design was kind of the first in a series of a number of different efforts around the world that used this model and iterated on the model and changed the model. And of course, Rebuild didn't create the model. It was iterated on from many, many things behind it. But there are many organizations that have created similar projects. What's good about us right now is that our projects are actually being implemented. So you can learn from that implementation progress. And we've taken the same exact process and we have iterated on it and we have worked around the world, and you're happy to talk to you about what the challenges that you're working on. I want to show you really quickly three projects that have come out of our proposals, and I urge you to come to our website and Google these projects because I'm going to do it really fast. The Big U was looking at the floodplain in Lower Manhattan, and it's an integrated flood protection system that goes around Manhattan. That's what makes it a U. But every single community has their own flood protection system, and it was designed with that community according to what they needed and the typography that was happening there. Living Breakwaters is headed up by Scape. It's offshore Staten Island. Staten Island's part of New York City, and it's a part that has major erosion from the force of the ocean that comes to that area. And these are offshore living breakwaters using e-concrete and oysters to stop that or to slow down that wave erosion that is really hurting the community behind it. And you can see what it looks like on the bottom of your screen. And the third one that I'll just mention is from Hoboken. It's called Resist, Delay, Store, and Discharge, because that's essentially what it's doing. It's resisting the breach points from the Hudson River, delaying using a massive amount of green infrastructure, storing the water that it can't delay, and then discharging it after it's clean. I'm going to go through quite quickly a couple of things that we have learned doing this work, and hopefully that can help you do your work. The first is that interdisciplinary groups and teams create better projects. When people come from the very beginning and talking about what they know, it really brings a richness that is otherwise never, ever achieved. The second is that there's distrust in government everywhere. I hear this all around the world every time we work, that place is special. Yes, you are definitely special, but it may not be because there's mistrust. So figuring out upfront how to call it, how to name it, and how to work with people immediately who distrust government really sets the tone for a very different process. The next is that procurement is hard no matter where you're doing it. So you need to be thinking about procurement from the very, very beginning and thinking about how you're going to manage it so you can actually implement these creative ideas. The next is that everything we design should be replicable and transferable to other places around the world so we can continue to learn from one another. These projects take a very long time to implement, and it is very important that we understand all the different steps that it takes. The next is having faith in communities. They always know what happens. They are the ones that are going to tell you, no, it actually flooded to this point and not that point. They're the ones that are going to tell you, no, Mr. Smith or Mr. Jones or whoever it is the expert. They really know what's going on, and you need to give them that chance from the very beginning to be part of that conversation and lend their expertise. And lastly is that plans change. There's a lot of things that happen between the idea and the implementation stage, and we know it's going to change. And the idea is to get ahead of that change and know that when it changes, it's okay. But we need to make sure that it's changed for good reason. And when it changes, those same communities need to be at the table, explaining to them why it's changed and being a partner in that decision-making process. If you want to learn anything more about our organization or this work, feel free to email me or hop on our website. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amy, for this very, very interesting presentation. It's good to see that designs are also being done driven by stakeholder design and involvement. Thank you again for being here and dedicating time to tell us a little bit about these designs. Let's move into the formal presentation portion of the webinar. We will first hear from Dr. Hans Gerels, Global Lead on Urban Resilience at Deltares, on resilient urban water systems for citizens and communities, cases of good adaptation practices in urban deltaic regions. Dr. Gerels works at Deltares as the Global Lead on Urban Resilience. His main fields of expertise include urban water management, flood risk, climate adaptation, and water-sensitive urban design. He is program leader of the Dutch Climate Proof City Knowledge Program as part of the Delta Program on Spatial Adaptation. And abroad, Hans has experience in many cities in, for example, Costa Rica, India, Laos, Mexico, Philippines, Puerto Rico, Singapore, South Africa, Sri Lanka, USA, the list goes on. Hans leads the framework agreement between the World Bank and Deltares on urban flood risk management in the World Bank's City Resilience Program. Hans is also a member of the board of directors of the European branch of the Resilient Cities Network. Hans, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nichelle, for this introduction. I am now trying to share my screen.
Yes, we can see your screen.
Very good. And over the next 10 minutes, I would like to talk with you about some cases of good adaptation practices and also tools and methods that can be used in urban regions for climate adaptation. And but let me start with just pointing out just a few trends and challenges that determine our work everywhere. And first of all, I still call it a trend, urbanization. It is something, of course, almost of all times, but at the same time, it is also very much determining the next few decades, in the next century. We know and we have seen the emergence of Asia, but we will also see in the next period of time in the future a similar development in Africa with urbanization and demography in Africa changing so much that it makes that continent very important in the world and in our work. And we have only just started to understand the disruptive technologies that we can read about every day in the news about artificial intelligence and machine learning. And we also see it already being introduced in our own work, in our own analysis and assessments and projections and modeling simulations. But it is really just the beginning. So this is going to really change our work in the future. Of course, there are also a lot of transitions taking place, geopolitical transitions, but also changes in the world that will also impact the way we work and how we can work in various regions. And adding to all of that, we also unfortunately see still an acceleration of climate change. And just yesterday, I think I saw in a news item that we, for the first time, touched upon the 1.5 degree of temperature increase, and that will only accelerate even more, impacting droughts and flood and heat stress and forest fires, and so on. And the funny thing is that we still are being surprised. So this is an example of flooding, and we see that also happening everywhere around the world. But for example, speaking for myself, in the Netherlands, we were not so used to that anymore. But recently, just 1 year ago, we saw a massive flooding taking place in the transboundary region of Belgium, Germany, and the Netherlands, and that made us reconsider what we also have to do in the Netherlands. And the same, so that holds for drought, but the same holds for flooding, but the same holds for drought. So also on drought and water scarcity, we see that happening in places we don't expect it, like in the Netherlands again, but also, for example, in a city like Paris, which is perhaps known to hydrologists for its flooding, but not so much for its water scarcity. But really, Paris is in the top 20 of water scarce cities. And of course, we know the example of the Po River in the northern part of Italy that runs dry every now and then, which is amazing, actually. Then let's turn to some good practices and approaches, and here's some positive stories. What you see here is perhaps a tiny example, but I like it very much. It's called the Green Village in Delft, and it's an area where a lot of experimentation takes place on urban nature-based solutions. So startups, other companies can test their new ideas and their new products to see how they test in reality before getting to implement them on a larger scale. And then, of course, every approach towards climate adaptation and urban resilience has to tick multiple boxes. So it always has to be a systems approach. It has to be a river basin or a catchment perspective, integrated, inclusive, equitable, place-based, community-based, nature-based, all the way down to sustainable. And I still like this graph on the right-hand side from Brown et al. That really shows that development of how a city can become a water-sensitive city, which perhaps is the best description of a city that has all of those elements, including adaptation and mitigation and urban resilience. Just a few examples of good practices that I am really fond of. First of all, Singapore's Active, Beautiful, Clean Waters program, the ABC program, which really takes nature-based solutions into the core of the program. It's all about implementing green and blue infrastructure in the city. And perhaps the noteworthy thing about this example is that it really is not just one example, not just one square or street or nice park, but it is really impacting the city in a positive way, and also impacting the thinking of people in that city about how that city should look like and how that city should be nature-based and livable. Another example is from Amsterdam. And knowing that we will have beautiful examples from Rotterdam in the next presentation, I thought it would be nice to have an example from Amsterdam. In Amsterdam, they have a program called Amsterdam Rainproof. And the good thing about this program is that it is really citizen-centered. So it is really, it has a massive communication effort and is really engaging and also including people living in Amsterdam to take action themselves. And it's being introduced in a great way, and in such a way that people living somewhere, having a garden or having a roof or living in a street can really do something themselves about retaining and storage of rainwater. A third example is not from a city, but is really a program effect. And now I'm tying back into the presentation of Amy in the previous presentation. She was already mentioning water as leverage, and it is really, you could really say it is sort of building on rebuild by design and resilient by design, but then now started in 2018 in a few cities in Asia. Now working in Cartagena in Latin America. And if you would have to summarize it in one sentence, which is difficult, it would have to be an integrated and inclusive methodology for transformative design-driven solutions to urban water and climate challenges during pre-project preparation towards implementation. So it's about, the ambition is to be transformative. It is about design and engineering. It's really focusing on climate challenges, aiming to make cities better and more livable, and better for people, and trying to bridge the gap between nice ideas at the beginning for the challenges that cities face, but then all the way down to really implement those projects. And this sort of snake-like a circular figure is actually from Rebuild by Design, showing that it's really stakeholder centered. It's citizen and stakeholder centered. Then just a little bit about methods and tools that we need to work on these aspects. First of all, I think that with every project or every initiative or endeavor, you need a sort of framework for analysis, running from inception and identification of the problem to assessment and quantification, building of strategies, preparing for implementation with detailed designs and so on, and then really implement things. And it must be a sort of iterative approach involving stakeholders, involving data, models, simulation, and a good vision and strategy. Another tool that can be used, or another method, I should say, that can be used is again a variation on the framework of analysis, but then much more focusing on being adaptive on the long term, looking at the change of climates and trying to adapt to the change of climates in a right pace. Really more practical tools for implementing blue and green infrastructure, nature-based solutions in urban settings they are also available. And this is just an example of a toolbox that helps you identifying and selecting nature-based solutions, looking at how they could be designed in a neighborhood, and then on the right-hand side, try to assess what the results of the combination of those measures are. And such tools can be supported by databases that have tens or sometimes hundreds of different green and blue solutions that can be tested and used to implement. On the flood side, there are quick and rapid developments in tools that make use of global data in combination with local data, and then quickly assess the flood risks and quickly support you in trying to figure out what sort of measures really reduce your flood risks. On the drought side, that's still a bit more complex because that involves both the water supply and the water demand side. And it really involves not only the perspective of one neighborhood or one city, but really a larger river basin or catchment in which water supply and water demand have to be met. And this is just one example from what is called the National Water Model in the Netherlands that combines the groundwater system with the surface water system and all sorts of impacts like irrigation and groundwater abstraction into a tool that helps you as a region or as a city to figure out how the right balance is between water supply and water demand. So in conclusion, yes, we have to act because the challenges are still immense, but there are some good practices and approaches and methods and tools, but we haven't talked about in this presentation about the data that are needed, the monitoring that is needed to really assess your impact. We haven't even talked about governance or political will, funding, capacity and education. But still, we have to accelerate project implementation, and I hope we are able to. Thank you. Back to you, Michel.
Many thanks, Hans, for this interesting presentation. It's good to see with all the requirements for approaches towards urban resilience, good to see some best practices and methods to give some structure to analyze and to make decisions. We will change the orders of the speakers due to the limited availability of our next speaker. And therefore, we will go to Pa Aji, from Jakarta. We will hear about resilience in the city of Jakarta, Indonesia. I'd like to welcome Pak Andika Aji, currently serving as the head of the Center for Research and Innovation at the Regional Development Planning Agency, Bapeda, within the Jakarta Professional Government, which has duties to develop urban research and innovation in Jakarta City as a global resilient city. Pak Aji earned a master's degree in urban administration and planning from the University of Seoul in 2015. Throughout his career, Pak Aji has actively participated in various educational and training programs focusing mainly on planning and budgeting. As a government official in Jakarta, he has held several roles, including positions in the Education, Sports, and Youth Subdivision, as well as the Libraries and Empowerment Division of the Community Welfare Department at the Regional Development Planning Agency. Since recently, March 2023, Pak Aji has also been appointed as the Jakarta's Chief Resilience Officer. Pak Aji, thank you for being here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Michelle. Hi, everyone. I'm Aji from Jakarta City. Maybe Anissa can help to this one. My presentation is about how Jakarta's journey to mitigate and about flood and also climate adaptation. Next. Okay. As a coastal metropolis, Jakarta is the home to about 10 million people, which cover area of about 660 kilometers square, and then surrounded with satellite cities around Jakarta. And also Jakarta is the heart of economic of Indonesia, and then can be counted as the fourth largest megacities in the world. And also because of the climate changes, nowadays we are expected to experience 1 centimeter per year rise on sea level in the coastal part of Jakarta, and 40% of Jakarta city itu that's sit in the below sea level rise. So at this time point, that also make the northern part of Jakarta is vulnerable to the flooding issue. So next, as I mentioned before, that the rise of sea level also make the north part of Jakarta prone to the flood. At the same time, Jakarta also facing the land subsidence because of the extraction of the water from the ground. So the other issue is Jakarta has many pollution like marine debris, untreated sewage discharge, and also the industrial waste. The other problem is clean water and sanitation access, also waste management issues, and habitat degradation and tidal flood. Like I mentioned before, that sea level rise also make that area is prone to the flood. Next. And we have the city resilience strategy at this time point, and it's that should be taken to become Jakarta, to make Jakarta more resilient. This step need to be improved in every possible method, including the implementing the city resilience strategy. So basically, the resilience strategy in Jakarta comes with the vision that Jakarta become more resilient in some pillars. like well prepared of Jakarta, healthy Jakarta, and also connected Jakarta. And its vision breakdowns into 12 direction and also 32 strategies at this time point. And this strategy is also implemented in the Jakarta Resilient Strategy Book and also the midterm planning of Jakarta City Government. Next. And this one is the effort of Jakarta to be more resilient at this time point. As you can see, the Jakarta have been reducing the disaster risk and impact of climate change. Some example, it's like you can see in the screen that we also make more green open space, also infiltration well to make more water absorption to the ground, and also the air pollution control, flood, food security, and also the other is river naturalization and normalization, rainwater harvesting, waste bank, intermediate treatment facilities for waste management, and also in connectivity issues, we developed the Transjakarta, also MRT and electric bus, and also the apps that can connect all of the facilities and services in Jakarta. Next. And this one is the timeline of our journey to become more resilient, climate resilient cities. As you see that the city start from 2007, and we the last one we in 2021 we published the climate action sequence through governorial instruction number 17 year 2021 to accelerate action in several sectors. In 2030, this is a milestone for climate action in Jakarta, that 30% of emission reduction and for reduction of vulnerable areas to be achieved. Another milestone in Jakarta is low carbon development with the aim to net zero emission in 2050. Next. As I mentioned before, that Jakarta is also vulnerable to the flood, and we make a flood control system at this point, and also we collaborate with Rotterdam cities as a sister city collaboration to make water management knowledge training to the public officer right now. As you see that Jakarta also faces the flooding issue from the three front, which is from the upstream area, and there is a runoff of the water, and also the local rain inside the border of Jakarta, and also the high tide of sea level rise that face in the northern part of Jakarta. This is the schematic design of the how the Jakarta city government cope the flooding issue in Jakarta. Next. This one also the cooperation and budgeting for flood in Jakarta. Then Jakarta collaborate with national government, also the neighboring province, and the private sector to make the Jakarta more resilient to the flood issues. Next. And this one is how Jakarta bridging the capacity gap of the flood, the capacity of the discharge for flood management issue. As you see that the flood management from time to time is Jakarta we're facing the many issues for the precipitation. Our last precipitation in 2020 also going high, and also in 2007 it's also going high. That's why that there is a gap from the existing capacity right now, and flood discharge and also the design capacity. That's we are now to make the development of infrastructure to river widening, and also folder development and rehabilitation, river dredging, coastal embankment, and we build also the many reservoir, lakes, and ponds, making vertical infiltration and doing it well. That's some of the strategy that Jakarta doing to cope the flood issues in the country. Next. This one is the two projects that Jakarta doing right now is NCICD, which is the National Capital Integrated Coastal Development. That try to mitigate the coastal issue that make the coastal protection and also land subsidence management, and that make the city more resilient. And the other project is we call it 942 project, which means we make 9 development of 9 folders for reservoir and also 2 river revitalization. This one hopefully can make Jakarta more resilient to the flood. Next. This one is one of another, I think, another improvement of how Jakarta make collaboration to make Jakarta more resilient. This one is the project is like cell waste upcycling. It's collaboration between Jakarta City Government and then also SDGs Office of Jakarta and Resilient Cities Network, or RTN. And with this kind of project, we want to make community empowerment, not just only to make the more resilient, but also to reduce the waste that produced by the industries in the area. As you can see in the map, it's the location of the Kalibaru is in the north of Jakarta, and it's well known for its green muscle industries that which are distributed around throughout the city. Yeah? So because of this industry, the waste just only left in the environment in the neighborhood area. So it make many environmental issues. So that's we initiate this project to make this waste become more valuable. So we train the people in that area to make upcycling of the waste, so they can produce more product to make money for from the waste. I mean, so with this kind of initiative, the waste also will be reduced and then make the environment of North Jakarta more healthy, and then the North Jakarta itself more resilient to the flood prone, like that. Next. It's already there. Thank you. So that's it. My presentation about
Thank you,
Jakarta.
Pak Aji.
We'll be back to you, Nisha.
Thank you, Pak Aji, for your presentation. And very interesting to hear Jakarta as a city which has so many challenges, urban challenges, coastal challenges. It was good to see how complex the system actually is, and that there are initiatives in Jakarta, but also all across Indonesia. Let's go back to the next speaker. Next speaker is Mr. Arnold Molenaar, Chief Resilience Officer of Rotterdam, the Netherlands, to share about resilience in the beautiful city of Rotterdam. After graduating in physical geography, Arnold started his career with ambitious trainee posts and jobs abroad. As deputy head of the Rotterdam Water Management Department, he was responsible for the water plan to Rotterdam. In 2008, he was appointed manager of the Rotterdam Climate Proof program, and Arnold is the first editor of the book Resilient Cities and Climate Adaptation Strategies, published in 2014. He was also responsible for Rotterdam's first resilience strategy, dating from 2016, and joined the Global Center on Adaptation part-time as affiliate lead of cities in 2018. In 2019, he hosted the Global Urban Resilience Summit in Rotterdam and joined the Global Steering Committee at the Resilient Cities Network. Just recently, last year, he coordinated the development of the Resilient Rotterdam strategy for the years 2022-2027. Arnold, thank you for being here, and we're looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Nishal. And while Olivia is setting, preparing the slides, yes, thank you, Olivia. I will try to keep it short because then we have some time also for a Q&A. And I would like to take you guys in the audience through a very short journey about our city, our Delta city, how we put climate adaptation on the agenda and how we have been developing in this process. So next slide, please. It will be about the approach and lessons. That's what I would like to share. And just to set the stage, a few slides about also the context rather than. So this webinar is about deltas and coastal areas. I think we heard already New York and Jakarta, and here we are in the middle of the Dutch delta and Rotterdam as a delta city. 80% of the city is below sea level, so that already speaks for itself. I think water is coming from all directions, and doing nothing is not an option. Next slide, please. And this is shown by this picture. Every drop of rainfall falling in the blue area has to be pumped by a huge system of pumping stations to the river. And part of the city, explicitly, the port area actually is in the brown area and is above sea level. And we face multiple challenges related to climate change. And next slide, please. On top of this, of course, we are also developing and keeping on developing and expanding our cities. And even without climate change, you could say climate resilience, water resilience is already a challenge for us as coastal areas and delta cities. Next slide, please. And this impact is already shown. It's not something happening in the future. All these cities are, I think, are more or less facing similar challenges, and we also have some small-scale flooding caused by high discharges in the river, combined with often high levels at sea. Excess rainfall, of course, but relatively new for us, as also Hans mentioned, is the longer droughts, as we are actually facing right now in the Netherlands. We already have a record of 5 weeks in a row without any rain, and especially the low-lying peat areas are suffering from this. So a shortage of water now is actually on the top of the agenda, which is quite a paradox, because normally we do have too much water. Next slide, please. So already years ago, and I will show in another slide the process, but we started to work on an integrated way, because that's the only way how to do it, to work on climate change and climate adaptation. And especially I would like to share the lesson that it is getting more and more important also to in this integrated approach, to match and include also other challenges like the energy transition, like the social resilience aspects. You cannot look only at climate adaptation separately, and to the other challenges also separately. And it's all about the development of our cities, and that's why we already. I think Rotterdam is maybe a water as leverage avant la lettre, because we already in 2008, with the start of the Rotterdam Climate Proof program, said it is about becoming adaptive and attractive at the same time. So you can use water resilience, but also climate resilience as a leverage to create a better, more livable, greener, and just city. So that's why the integrated approach is so important. Next slide, please. And that's why it is, when we talk about inclusiveness, it is about including citizens, but also including the key stakeholders from the beginning of this process. And Olivia asked me to tell a few words about this process and how to include these stakeholders. So important part of our process has been the development of this long-term vision, what we called in that days Rotterdam Water City 2035, and that was just a dot on the horizon, but it was done with all the stakeholders together. So everybody felt ownership about that long-term vision, and that was a very important start. Of course, at the end, it is also always about money. But when you have the same feeling and the same ownership, then talking about money, it becomes a bit easier. Nowadays, we have this alliance, waterkracht, you could say water power, when you translate it into English. So this is still a strong platform, a strong bond. And the other trend, I think, and talking about inclusiveness, is the inclusiveness of the citizens. It has been mentioned by Amy and by Hans also. You could say we used to do the work on adaptation for the citizens, but that has been transformed in working with the citizens, and more is done by the citizens. So that's really a great development that you see in our process. Next slide, please. and that it has been a process is shown by this slide. So we, actually, more than 20 years ago, we already started with the first integrated water plan. But now we do have a resilience strategy, which is about adaptation, but also combine it with social resilience aspects, etc. So it's becoming more and more, well, an integrated approach. Next slide, please. And I think the main, you could say, core of our approach is that we, to become climate resilient, chose to go for more flexible solutions, but also here and there allow a certain way of flooding, because you cannot keep the water out everywhere. So try to live with the water is our motto, actually, and especially including the work done by the citizens, invest in on a large scale, small scale solutions. That's so we need big infrastructures, but we also need a huge amount of small interventions, you could say, and the change of not only looking and working with technical solutions, but especially more and more, where possible, with nature-based solutions. Next slide, please. And that has resulted in Rotterdam already in a huge amount of projects that are already implemented. So these are not artist impressions; they're all pictures taken by and about the projects in the city. And I think an important one here is they are all multi-functional, and sometimes it is about starting. You need a strategy, but also start with applying small projects that are visible and scale them up district by district. So do it really in a programmatic and structural way. Next slide, please. And of course, now on the top of our agenda is also something Hans mentioned. This is keeping us more and more busy, and that is the acceleration of sea level rise. And I think especially for our coastal areas, the delta cities and the deltas, this is a concern. So how we really have to look on a long term, what is happening, and we have to translate that to short term decisions. We know roughly what kind of scenarios there are, but we have to work on more details in these scenarios, because tomorrow we are building new buildings, and they will be there for, well, say 100 years. So the long-term scenarios are important for the short-term decisions. Next slide, please. And of course, we're not doing this alone. That's why I really want to stress as well to, and that's why it's great to have this webinar, to really exchange this as much as possible with your peers. And this is the Resilient Cities Network. And so I was really happy to see my colleague, the CRO of Jakarta, also in this webinar. So this collaboration is strong, and I think the WAC, the Water Adaptation Community of the Global Center, can be a good facilitator in this exchange. So my final slide, the next one is just to conclude. Again, integrated, but even holistic approaches are needed, I think, on all levels in the city, but also looking at the domains that I just also mentioned. We have to break down these sectoral approaches and the silos, create ownership amongst the key stakeholders and the citizens and the residents. And multi-benefit solutions are needed. And the last thing I cannot read because the pictures are in front of the last row. But I want to thank you. I hope my message was clear.
Thank you, Arnold, for this very, very interesting presentation. I can only reiterate what you have said. And I made a note for myself. What happens long-term needs short-term decisions. So I can only reiterate that. Thank you very much for these insights. Let's go back to our next speaker, Mrs. Veronica Zagare, on her presentation, Embracing Differences Towards an Integrated Approach to Climate Adaptation, Coastal Cities along the Paraná Delta in Argentina. Ms. Zagare was awarded the degree of doctor by the Technical University of Delft. She's an architect, graduated cum laude from the University of Belgrano in Buenos Aires, and holds a master in urban economics from Di Tella University, also in Buenos Aires. Works as a guest researcher at the Department of Urbanism at the Architecture faculty at the TU Delft, and she is a member of the Instituto Superior de Urbanismo of the University of Buenos Aires. In 2021, she was awarded the IUCN Academy Professional Certificate on the IUCN Global Standards on Nature-Based Solutions. She has developed many publications, including books, chapters, and articles in international peer-reviewed journals, apart from carrying on the supervision of master theses of various students. She's currently the coordinator of the Argentinian wing of the Delta Alliance International within the scope of Fundación Torcuato de Tella. Thank you, Ms. Zagare. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you for the invitation. It's an honor to be here. I will share my screen. Okay. Well, yes, as you mentioned, I will talk about the case of the Paraná Delta, which is located in Argentina. I will explain which is the particular situation of this delta in relation to the challenges and the pressures related to land use changes and climate. And I will also present the situations regarding adaptation policies in the area and present an idea that we are developing at the Delta Urbanism Group at TU Delft regarding adaptation in the cities of the Delta. Well, the delta of the Paraná River is very important for the continents of South America, because the Paraná River is the third largest river in America, and it is the most important river of the basin. The basin is called La Plata Basin, and this catchment area presents more than 3 million square kilometers, and it's very important for South America. The particularity of this river is that it, instead of flowing directly into the sea, it flows through another river, which is a unique case in the world. And this river is the Rio de la Plata. This is an estuary. And this estuary is very connected to the delta of the river, of the Paraná River. So the Paraná Delta and the Rio de la Plata estuary are considered in a way a geologic and morphological unit, because they act together and they influence each other. This is a very large delta, which is influenced by the flows of Uruguay River and Paraná River and all the tributaries. It is also influenced by rainfall and by a phenomenon that is called sudestada, which are southeaster winds that come from southeast, increasing the level of the Rio de la Plata, which blocks the drainage of the delta of the Paraná River through the delta, and also it blocks the drainage of the cities and the tributaries. So this is a very important phenomenon because it causes major floods on the coastal cities of the Buenos Aires province, Uruguay, and also the delta, the Paraná Delta. Due to the influence of the rivers, the delta as a wetlands is characterized by different policies of floods and droughts. This is natural, but in times of heavy rainfall and southeaster winds, the situation increases and there are severe droughts and severe floods. This delta is a very large delta. It covers more than 22 square kilometers, 22,000 square kilometers, and it is located in Argentinian part, and it covers areas in 3 provinces and 19 municipalities. So this is a very complex territory to manage. And it is also called a wetland mosaic because it is very different. We can find different landscape units along the delta. This is a very complex area to manage, as I already mentioned, and the main characteristics of this delta is heterogeneity. Not only talking about landscape units, but talking about occupation, urban occupation. There are not many cities inside of the delta, but the cities are located along the margins of the islands in the continental part. And this city network is very important. They form the wealthiest corridor of the country. And it is very important not only for Argentina, but also for the rest of countries of South America, because they create a corridor for commerce, and it connects South America with the rest of the world. These cities that are located along the margins of the delta are very different from each other. They are, we can find ports, industrial cities with industrial poles, small cities that are specialized in fruit production or forestry or mainly fishing, and other cities that are bigger, such as the metropolitan area of Buenos Aires, which is the largest conurbation of the country with more than 14 million inhabitants. There is another metropolitan area, which is Rosario, that it is also important and it's part of Santa Fe province. So we have different scales of cities with different specialities located in the delta. And the main pressures of the delta are related to land use changes for production processes and are related to the modification of the soil and hydrological cycles for productive processes. And they are also related to the introduction of practices and technologies from the continental part towards the wetland, which causes obviously negative impacts. This also happens in relation to urban occupation. The same happens with urban patterns that introduce inside of the wetlands, towards the wetlands, changing the topography and the hydrology of the islands. As I already mentioned, all the cities are located on the margins of the delta. So we can identify different situations along the area. But mainly, this is characterized by a huge contrast between what happens on the island and what happens on the cities. The cities are very crowded, very populated. They have certain urban patterns. And on the islands, we can identify almost pristine landscape that are being transformed due to this new practice of occupation. Another pressure is related to the market and infrastructure and transportation, because as I already mentioned, this is the wealthiest corridor of the country, and it connects not only the cities of Argentina, but also other cities of South America, because through the Paraná River lies the Paraná-Paraguay waterway that connects this delta with Paraguay, Uruguay, Brazil, and other countries of South America, and it connects the global market with the continent. That's why this is a huge pressure for the delta. This changes the dynamics of the hydrology of the area and creates pressures because there is a need for ports, there is a demand for infrastructure, for commerce. So this is a very important pressure for the area. And finally, the pressures related to climate change. We have already seen in the previous presentation which are the effects that we can identify in different areas, in different deltas. We have the same pressures and the same challenges, but here we can identify an increase of climate variability and increasing of pulses of floods and droughts. And this combined with deforestation, land use changes, and unsustainable practice, it leads to changes in the natural dynamic. It creates severe droughts, and it leads the moment for fire outbreaks, which in 2008 indeed burning out 12% of the delta surface. Regarding adaptation policy, we can identify two plans, two initiatives. The first one is the PIECAS, which is the Integral Strategic Plan for the Conservation and Sustainable Development of the Paraná Delta, which is already under development. It is not being fully implemented. It was developed firstly in 2008 and relaunched in 2014 and 2019, but it is not fully implemented. Some initiatives are being developed, but not all the plan. And there is a new initiative for the development of regional plan for adaptation for the Paraná River Delta, which is also beginning to be developed, and it is in a starting phase. And both plans are within the National Plan for Climate Change Adaptation and Mitigation Framework that is being developed by the Ministry of Environment of the country. But this is a very different, very difficult task to implement national plans at different scales and different levels, because this delta is under several scales of jurisdictions. It is under a national jurisdiction, it is under 3 provinces, provincial jurisdictions, and it is also under 19 local municipalities jurisdictions. So governance in this area is a very, very difficult task. That's why within the team of Delta Urbanism, which is an interdisciplinary research program of TU Delft in the Netherlands, we are developing a project to link these national and regional adaptation plans with the local adaptation measures, trying to build a tailor-made adaptation tool for the government, for the local government, to design and monitoring adaptation plans at the municipality level, with the help of different actors and other stakeholders, such as the social civil society, university, and other institutions. So our idea is to embrace differences. I have already mentioned that we have different situations, and it is almost impossible to implement and create and implement an integral plan that is homogeneous for such an heterogeneous delta. So we need local plans, we need to build plans for attending local realities with local participation of the people. That's why we are creating a project to develop a mapping matrix that allows to build an integrated framework to map the different challenges, pressures, landscape unit, economic activities, and other indicators for the local areas, and to create a possibility to link it to nature-based solutions, so that the local authorities can have this tool to link the local adaptation measures with the national and regional adaptation plans. Just to give an example of our situations, these are only 6 cities of the Delta, and we can distinguish different types, different scales, different types of occupation, different types of activities, and also different landscapes. So we have these differences, huge differences. So we must embrace that to create an integrated approach, and we must understand and integrate this local reality to the national adaptation policy. So we hope that we continue developing this plan, and we can show you further results in other meetings. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Veronica. Nice to see you highlighting the role of urban planning in risk-informed practices to achieve urban resilience. Thank you very much for your time and the presentation. Let's go to our last speaker for the day, Professor Chris Zevenbergen from IHE Delft, about urbanizing deltas and the importance of locally led adaptations. Professor Zevenbergen is professor at IHE Delft on urban flood risk management and of the Delta urbanism track at the TU Delft. He's also a visiting professor at the Southeast University in China, also project director of DeltaCap capacity development program funded by the Dutch government to support the implementation of the BDP, the Bangladesh Delta Plan 2100 in Bangladesh, and of AFMA, a 7-year SWF program to develop and implement anticipatory flood risk management in Alexandria, Egypt. Professor Zevenbergen, the floor is yours. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Michel. Thank you for the introduction, and very nice to see some colleagues, Veronica, but also Hans Gerels and Arnold Molenaar. Now, very nice to see you in this webinar, and thanks for the invitation. There has been so much said already, and I prepared a presentation which I'm happy to share. But maybe as a start, I would like to share with you some what I see changing perspectives. And Michel mentioned in his introduction that we are embracing an adaptive approach that is assumes that we have an understanding of the threats which are coming to us, and that we can incrementally adjust our systems, and then when new knowledge is arriving, making different decisions. Now, what we see now is, at least in the Netherlands, but I see it also in Bangladesh, that the challenges are so huge. The uncertainties we are facing are still, I would say, very, very challenging. But that it also needed to take decisions, and that we have to take big decisions. And we can no longer say incrementally adjust our systems. We have to take big decisions, and that means that we have to have a vision where we want to go to. And I think that is also resonating in some other presentations, which is so important. And what Amy was clearly showing, the rebuild by design approach, where there is very beautiful initiatives in the US happening, and that these are triggered by that, of course, that the devastating flood what happened there, Sandy. But we see now that in places where we have to anticipate that it is very difficult to really change our behavior and to take action. Now, I would like to share my screen to go to my presentation, and I will try to do it briefly because I think we have not much time. Do you see my presentation?
Yes, yes, yeah.
Okay, and I see this is the last slide, so I go a bit back. This is a slide to show a bit some changing perspective. This is Dhaka, and Dhaka is rapidly growing. Huge infrastructure investments are taking place. And what we see is there is no real long-term vision. And the Delta Plan, which is being adopted a few years ago by the Prime Minister, is a very nice program with 80 projects, but the integration is lacking. So it is still a struggle to define a sort of long-term vision where they want to go to. And that's a bit the paradox we are in. We have to take action now. There's a lot happening, a lot of investments are taking place. And on the other hand, we need to have time and capacities to build a sort of long-term vision to steer those short-term actions in the right direction. As Arnold already said, we have to take care about our short-term actions, because they have to comply with our long-term vision. So that is what we see in Bangladesh, that there is a lack of a long-term vision. Then when we go to the Tana Delta, which is an almost pristine delta, but it will rapidly change. We see that multinationals are buying land. There's a huge interest to provide, to deliver and produce biofuels. So this delta will change in maybe two decades enormously. So, and again, there is no real long-term vision, and let alone that the short-term projects are positioned into a sort of sustainable trajectory. Now, in the Netherlands, we see that our large infrastructure becomes outdated, we have to replace them in a few decades. We also see that the lead time for those decisions is quite long, several decades. So that again does mean that we cannot say we are adaptively changing our system. We have to take rigorous decisions very soon. So we have to shift from adaptive planning to planned adaptation. That is a bit what we see. Now, if we want to summarize a bit the challenges, you can say there's a much emphasis on the short term. There's a lack of a vision, an inspiring vision. There is, you can say, a huge driving force emerging from the energy and food production. These are probably more important than climate change as a driver. So these big drivers are really shaping the future of our delta. And then we see also that the window of opportunity to really change our practices to enable climate resilient development is narrowing. So we have to take action. Now, some notions which challenges these actions. One is if we make projections about our future, then we can use models. For instance, this is an urban growth model. And we see, of course, those urban growth models, they are using historical behavior. We call it the business as usual scenario, where we use historical behavior to make those projections. And what we, of course, know is that these projections are of course, not going to happen, because cities are not stupid. They will change their behavior over time. They will learn. But the challenge is, of course, how do you use that behavior in your models? How can you really model our future? And also the meta model we have in the Netherlands, the delta model, we also now learn that these predictions are not happening. Our system is behaving in a different way. So that's notion one. Another notion is that we see that prototyping and demonstration is a very important driver, and it shows a bit possible, you can say perspectives, also means for local communities to act. And Amy already showed that very, very beautifully, how these projects are really triggering change, and also Arnold Molenaar. So the importance of prototyping is becoming very, very important. Small steps to start with, but of course they need to be aligned with that long-term provision. Then the notion of, we can say, looking into the opportunities. And the opportunities are driving our future. And one of the opportunities could also be the energy and food transition. And we need to maybe liaise more with those who are taking the lead in these domains than the ones who are working in climate adaptation. And as the GCA already said many times, there's a huge investment taking place in climate mitigation, but as opposed to climate adaptation, there is a limited investment taking place. And that is, of course, because the business model behind it is very complicated, and that is not the case for climate mitigation. So we need to really see where are the driving forces, where are the opportunities to make a difference. Then the local government as actors, that has been mentioned several times. They are driving the innovations. They are providing also the frameworks for investment. So they are extremely important. But on the other hand, you can say the capacities to really act and to do something is very limited. So there is a huge demand for capacity building, and that's also what Arnold Molenaar is saying. The city networks, the alliances he's taking part in are meant to foster that peer learning, which is so much needed. Then my last slide is an example of locally led adaptation. And the more I'm into this work, the more I see the importance of locally led adaptation. Here we are working in Bangladesh, where we are focusing on the small towns. There are about 500 Purishavas, the small towns, but they are accommodating a large fraction of the future growth. And these small towns, they are not equipped to deal with that. Now, one of the initiatives which has been also financially supported by the Dutch government is urban demonstrators. And what we want to do is to provide with very small money, small funding, small projects. And what we see is there are programs financed by ADB and World Bank on infrastructure improvement. It is about big money, large projects, long lead times. And not all of these Purushavas can be serviced by these programs. And when these programs are really in the phase of implementation, the Purushavas is already doubled in its size, and the needs which they have has changed over time significantly. So these large-scale projects are often providing, say, solutions or interventions which are no longer really needed, or which are not really meet the needs and the demands of the local people. So what is really needed is small projects which can be implemented within maybe 1 or 2 years of time. They should, of course, locally demand driven. And by doing so, the capacity within those local communities can be built. So what we have done, we started in 2 Purushavas, where we defined jointly the most, you can say, the most urgent issues, and these concerns the public spaces. Public spaces in those Purushavas are disappearing, those cities are expanding, so green spaces are consumed. And what we want to do is bring those public spaces back, make them green, make them multifunctional, and that can be done with very simple means. There's a lot of working force available in those countries. There are local materials available, landscaping. You can think about furniture, urban furniture, all with local materials, cleaning, waste collection. All these small interventions can be done with little money, and they show at least how steps can be made, and also they form a sort of vehicle which leads to the development of the capacities which those Purushavas so much needed, in particular to attract funding, to make good plans, and to really accommodate, say, the needs of the local communities. So, Michel, this was in short, in an elevator pitch, what I would like to share.
Thank you, Professor Chris Zevenbergen. Very nice to see also Bangladesh reappearing. It shows that we also still have a lot of work to do in facilitating the shift from mitigation to adaptation. Thank you for those insights. Well, now it's time to go to the panel discussion. So I would like all the speakers to turn out their microphone and their video. And we are indeed missing Baaji, who had to run, unfortunately. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. We have all the speakers here already. Let me see. Yes. So we prepared a couple of questions, and I will just go through the questions and ask the speaker to one of the speakers to respond to this question. First question is for Professor Zevenbergen. How can governments, listening to all the presentations, the applications in several cities, the question pops up, how can governments make better use of local nonprofits or community groups to accelerate equitable adaptation? This for Professor Chris.
Yeah, I think one of the ways to do that is, of course, to include them in those initiatives I just mentioned in those Purushavas, where, for instance, the public spaces are being designed in another way, where multifunctional functions are being added to those public spaces, and that can only be done, of course, in close collaboration with those who are using those public spaces, or those who are seeing there are local business opportunities. So I feel that those locally led adaptation is, of course, the vehicle for governments to include those stakeholders best. So that would be my answer, Michel.
Yeah, so it comes again down to involving stakeholders from the beginning on, from the ground on, because they can play an important role in not only content and their insights, but also in making profitable competition.
Michel?
Thank you so much. Hans, yes, of course.
Chris, can I add to that?
Of course, Hans.
So you stress the bottom-up approach, right? But if you look at governance and finance, I would also welcome a stronger top-down approach. And if you look at, for example, the COVID crisis, or the way, for example, the European Commission responds to, well, a war going on in Europe at the moment, that has very much top-down approaches, and they are relatively robust and successful. So if you look at the COVID crisis, there was a much needed top-down approach with a lot of investments and a lot of coordinated effort. And I would think that the combination of both bottom-up and strengthening and funding by a more top-down would be a very good, strong combination. Yeah.
I agree, Hans. I agree.
Thank you both for these excellent additions. Thank you, Hans. In light of time, I will move on. I'm pretty sure that we can have more interesting discussions on that. Next question for Mr. Molenaar. For what adaptation measure is a city dependent on national and local government? For example, which measures can cities implement themselves? And I think Rotterdam is a nice example to elaborate on a little bit. Arnold?
Ooh, it's difficult to give a short answer, but let me try. Because I think it, of course, it's depending in which country you are, about the culture and the governance, especially. So I think in most cities, but also, and that's also the case in Rotterdam, there are multiple stakeholders responsible for part of the puzzle, you could say. And so in our case, we have a national government, we have we are thankful for that. We are having the water boards, the regional water authorities, you could say, provincial government, and the city, in our case, also the port. And they all have their responsibilities. And that's why it's important to have these key partners from the beginning on the table. Because we have to solve it together, and at the same time we do have our particular responsibilities, like the cities are responsible for the sewer management, but the water boards are responsible for the sewer treatment, and so we are depending on each other, but not to forget actually the most important stakeholder, and that are the citizens. And so a lot of things can be done related to the official responsibilities of these key stakeholders, but please do not forget that a lot also can be done by the citizens themselves. Yeah? And just one very small example, then I will stop talking. And in Holland, we started the competition of removing tiles in cities, and in English you could say it's the tile popping competition. And it started with Amsterdam and Rotterdam, but now 200 cities in Holland, and it's managed by the national government. And millions of tiles have been removed. And every year we do have this competition. So adaptation also can be fun.
Yes, thank you for that. I've heard of that initiative, and also in my direct community, it's people are removing their tiles, so very popular. Maybe also nice to hear from Veronica on, because Arnold, you mentioned it's governance dependent, it's culture dependent. That's a very important remark. So maybe also nice to hear from Ms. Veronica on how that works in Argentina, for example, or Latin.
Yes. I was listening to Chris, Hans, and Arnold. We have seen today different cases, different cities. Argentina has also its particularity, as well as the other places. But here in Argentina, it's very difficult to align the national, local, and provincial and local governments, and also with the participation of the citizens, which is the most important part of the chain. Because if we don't have the participation and the agreement of the citizen, it will be impossible to create any change for the future. So I think that they seem to be small, this competition of the removing tiles, but it is the beginning of a real change. So I think that it is important to learn from these examples to apply to other countries. For instance, Argentina, to implement these kind of small measures that can have an aggregate impact in the future, because the top-down alignment maybe will never be accomplished. So it is important to start bottom-up also.
Yes, great addition. And also it's important to understand that things take time, especially softer cultural governance aspects. They take time to change. Thank you for these additions, Veronica. Next question I have for Hans. How does building urban water resilience help address other development challenges, such as, for example, food security? Or energy transition, or
or livability, or
exactly.
biodiversity, or health, or
yes.
and so on. I think we saw some nice examples, starting with Amy in beautiful projects in New York that really, after, well, such a devastating crisis, of course, I think those projects help the city to become even more livable and for its citizens. And it is this is in fact the key of the water is leverage program, like Arnoud was also explaining, with similar approaches in Rotterdam, that a water challenge or a climate challenge, or purely looking at flooding or drought, is the beginning, is perhaps the challenge that ignites something. And then, if done well, in examples from water as leverage or from resilience by design, or in Rotterdam, you see that those projects beautify the city, but not only beautify the city, but also help citizens collaborate. Green infrastructure can be good for your health, not only for flood retention, but for water retention, but also for your health. And the same perhaps with food. So it can draw the attention to food production in small scale urban agricultural projects, but it can also improve biodiversity, and by improving the lives of pollinators, it might improve food security as well. And if you look at the city a bit broader, also including the surrounding area, it may also improve agricultural areas around the city. So in multiple ways. I need to stop here. Yeah.
Thank you, Hans. We can go on and on indeed. Yes, it's good to see that there are also added co-benefits. We have a lot more questions, I'm sure of that, but in light of time, we have to stop here. So in summary, thank you, everybody. We've seen that achieving a water resilient city is really, really a task where there are clear roles for governments, but also for the public and the private sector. I mean, the word stakeholder engagement and involving stakeholders has appeared so many times. And for me, that's one of the key takeaways of today. I would like to pass back to Olivia for some small updates on the water adaptation community.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll try to wrap up quite quickly here. So first of all, thank you, Nishal, for chairing, and thank you to all of the participants for attending, and of course our speakers for taking time to make these presentations and being here today. The recording and slide decks will be available later today on the Water Adaptation Community webpage. I'll drop a link. We have 2 more webinars coming up as part of this Futureproofing Climate and Water Adaptation webinar series with the IPDC. So a webinar on integrated coastal zone management, the date will be announced soon. And then another webinar on small islands and the climate emergency, looking at the challenges and opportunities, will be on July 5th. As mentioned on our last webinar, we recently launched a Water Adaptation Community LinkedIn group. So I will also share the link to that in the chat. I'm going to paste those now, and I'm going to end us quite quickly here. So there are the links if anyone wants to grab those before we close out. Again, thank you, everyone, and hopefully we'll see you on the next 2 webinars as well. We have an interactive water adaptation community webpage there if you want to try to engage with others, post articles, and create discussions there. That is very welcome. So with that, I will let everyone go. Big thank you again, and take care, everyone.